This is The Agenda, and this is our special segment. It is Climate Conversations, when we basically turn our attention to the latest issues that are raising their heads ahead of COP28. I think we've only got about, 72 or 73 days until the start of the COP28 Climate Summit. And it's fair to say top of the agenda, as is the case at all of these climate events, is the carbon emissions and the problems that those carbon emissions are causing. Now, there's two different ways that you can approach this. You can either reduce the amount of carbon emissions that you're creating, which of course would mean less burning of fossil fuels, or you can capture what is already in the atmosphere. Now, my understanding is that carbon capture is quite a complex industry, and certainly there are climate activists who don't think that it should be part of the conversation at all. They say that actually the focus should remain on reducing the amount of emissions that are being released into the atmosphere, and that would mean reducing the amount of fossil fuels that are going to be used. But certainly there is no doubt that carbon capture is moving up the agenda as in terms of importance. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to discuss it in more detail right here on the agenda in our climate conversations today. And I'm delighted to say that I'm joined in the studio by one of the UAE's experts on the subject, Dr. Mohammad Abu Zahra. He's from the Global Carbon Capture Institute, and he's joined me in the studio. Good to have you with us, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Good morning.
Good to have you with us, because I think not very many people really know what carbon capture is. Let's start with the simplest of questions. What is it?
Okay. So we all know about the problem we're facing with the carbon dioxide emissions, and we need to reduce that. There are multiple means to do it: renewable energy efficiency, stop using fossil fuel or reducing using fossil fuel, and then carbon capture, transport, and storage. So carbon capture, transport, and storage is simply, instead of allowing the carbon dioxide being emitted to the atmosphere, we will take that flue gas that contains the carbon dioxide, treat it with some chemical solvents, solid materials, or other means of gas separation technologies, and then that carbon dioxide we remove from the atmosphere or from the flue gas will be compressed, transported, and then injected underground in deep saline aquifers or depleted oil and gas field. So it will be like high pressure liquid phase type of material. When you inject it underground, it will be trapped between the solid particles and the water particles and the sand. Now we talk about injection at a very deep geological formation. So we make sure it doesn't go to the atmosphere again. So instead of allowing the CO2 accumulating in the atmosphere, we want to inject it underground and keep it there forever.
That definitely sounds like the plot of a Bond movie. Like, do you know what I mean? You can almost imagine why people are a bit like, whoa, wait a sec. Because first of all, it's a gas. And so I think people don't necessarily understand the chemical process of making it a liquid. And you're like, and then your immediate response is, okay, so you're going to bury it, but what if it explodes?
Now, I don't expect people on the street to really understand the chemical process of that fully. But our role as experts is try to bring it to their understanding as possible. Now, CO2, when it's trapped underground, there is no possibility of explosion.
Okay.
That's
or bursting out when it's not meant to.
Yeah. Now, there is a concern if we inject it underground, how we make sure it will not release back to the atmosphere. And that's why there is some geological formation we need to check and make sure it is there as a sealing where it doesn't allow the CO2 to go back to the atmosphere. Then we need to install some monitoring techniques which tells you if there is any leak or anything like that. But it's important to stress that this technology is nothing new. CO2 has been captured and injected underground for more than 30-40 years. People have been using CO2 for enhanced oil recovery since the 70s in South United States and other places globally. And for the purpose of CCS as a storage, there are some examples in Norway, here in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, where thousands of tons of CO2 are being injected underground.
So we know it's effective. We know it's a technology that works. Is it just the expense then that has been meaning that it hasn't become more prevalent?
I would say it is still expensive, and other means also of cutting down carbon dioxide emissions are expensive too. We have been talking earlier about the reduction in renewable costs because there have been funding, there have been acceleration in deployment. So what lacks for the CCS or carbon capture and storage is really more funding. We need to work at a larger scale and base, and we need the government to push regulations and policies so we can see the technology deployment rolling more. We talk now about 37 operational projects globally as a large scale. One of them is in the UAE, but we need to scale that up. We need to see hundreds of projects coming online in the coming 20-25 years.
So why is this a viable option for the problem that we're facing at the moment? Because we are facing global warming. It's being caused by the emissions getting trapped in the atmosphere and the greenhouse gas effect, the greenhouse effect. Why not just stop burning fossil fuels, and then we wouldn't have to do this expensive process of burying the carbon?
I wish we could stop really burning fossil fuel at this stage. Like, if anyone can go to Google and look what is the energy mix globally, we still around 70% of our electricity and power for the industry, for our transportation, all comes from fossil fuel. Now, renewable is important, energy efficiency, we need all these solutions. However, in many countries, we'll continue to rely on fossil fuel for much longer time. And that brings in the importance of a technology like carbon capture, utilization, or transportation and storage. Because while you are using fossil fuel, because there is no alternative or whatsoever, we can decarbonize these fossil fuel technologies for the industrial sector, for the power generations, and other technologies. And it's important to stress quickly that some industries, you cannot avoid the carbon dioxide emissions, like steel and cement. The production process will emit CO2. So you cannot resolve the problem with renewables only. So you need a technology like CCS.
I don't want to sound too simplistic on this or too like a tree hugger, but can't you just plant lots of trees instead? Because we know that trees are amazing at absorbing carbon. Are there not more natural ways of stopping this carbon being released into the atmosphere?
I think we need all of the above solutions, but we need to talk about the scale. How many trees you want to plant? If we talk now, we emit more than 37 gigatons of carbon dioxide a year. That's huge. That's like these too many trees to absorb. So we need the plantation, we need the trees. Quickly on the CCS, it delivers at large scale. So for example, the project we have in Abu Dhabi, it's 800,000 tons CO2 being captured per year. If we look at the scale, this is equivalent of removing 170,000 cars from the street. So the emission you remove is equivalent to the emissions of 170,000 cars. So that's an advantage of CCS, where it can really remove bulky amount of CO2 directly from a single source.
And so where is the carbon being sequestered? Is it under the sea, or is it in the same places that you drew the gas and the oil out from originally?
Yeah, you can inject it in the depleted oil and gas field. So these are excellent options because we understand the geology and we have been extracting fossil fuel for a long time. Other option is to go in deep saline aquifers, and these could be onshore or offshore. Now, it varies based on regulations in the countries if they will allow to go under seabed or not. But in our region here, most of the interest currently is to go onshore.
All of the other sort of various ways I've heard of sequestering carbon are sort of, I fear that they may be along the sort of tree line of conversation. So, for example, I heard of an organisation in Oman, a startup in Oman, where they're attempting to turn it into rock, carbon dioxide into rock, another scientific process I'm not truly understanding. Is that something that could ever be scaled?
I think so. They are testing it. There's what's called mineralization. So they inject the CO2 in specific geological formation. They turn it into minerals or rocks. And that's a viable technology. They just need to test it more and scale it up. So we have multiple technological options for removing the CO2 from the source, directly from the atmosphere, like what's called direct air capture. Then what to do with the CO2 after being captured? We can use it for mineralization, utilize it, produce fuel, produce polymers, produce other materials, or inject it underground, what we call sequestration or storage.
So there's lots of different things that can be done with this carbon. It feels like a conversation that could go on for a very long time. And I think we are very much just skimming across the top of it at the moment. But Dr. Zahra, thank you so much for joining us for this preliminary conversation. We will be dipping deeper as we approach COP28. But it's been a great pleasure to have you in the studio. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Dr. Mohammad Abu Zahra there, Head of Middle East North Africa region for the Global Carbon Capture Institute, just introducing the subject to us, really, so that we get a concept of what will be a very, very prominent part, I think, of the conversation at COP28 as to what we should do with rising emissions in the world. Right, that brings us to a close of Climate Conversations today. Remember, it's an ongoing series that we have here on Dubai Eye 103.8. I think the Business Breakfast will be grabbing hold of the mantle next. I think the next conversation will be with them. But in the meantime, it's been fantastic delving a little bit deeper into what needs to be done with those emissions.